Do you tube?
Tube, ski.
Ski? Do you ski?
Yeah.
I don't. That's too dangerous.
It's too dangerous.
No, it's not too dangerous. I don't know. I never, like, the tubing is fun enough for me. I never look at somebody water skiing and I'm like, I should give that a whirl, you know? Because, like, I have just as much fun laying on my belly. I don't need to try and stand up like that. It just sounds like a bad idea. Thanks for joining us on the Clarify podcast, where Kelsey and Ben answer any questions that you, the congregation, have texted in. Do you have questions? Are you confused? Let us clarify. So there's been a lot more questions added, so we'll get to the questions, and we're really excited about that, but keep sending them in because we will get to them. But the first one we're going to answer today, and these are the two that we've chosen are kind of related to one another, yes. Yep. So I kind of modified this question just a little bit, just to make more sense when I read it. Not that the person who wrote it didn't make sense, because I understood what they were saying, but anyway. So could the U.S. be considered evil today and be going down the same path as Israel? Because we've been talking about how, like, the kings in Israel got continuously worse. And if so, does that put us at risk of being overpowered by other nations?
Yes.
Why did you say it like that?
Because I think it's very clear. But in all seriousness, we are doing a lot of evil things. Anybody that doesn't think that we are is just either blind or living under a rock. That being said, we're nowhere on the same scale as what Israel was when God sent them into exile. You know, like, there's a lot of bad things that are happening in America. There's a lot of evil happening in America. But when you look at America, I don't think you really see when you look at America as a whole, I don't think you see it as evil necessarily. When you look at the news, sure. When you look at this or that and the other thing, maybe. But, like, if you just take a drive through the countryside, I don't think anybody is like, oh, this place is just evil. You know, like, I look at, like, you know, what's going on in the Middle East right now, or look at, you know, all those kind of conflicts and all. Like, I look at that kind of evil, I'm like, we're nowhere near even that, let alone to the point where God's like, you know what, I'm just going to destroy you because you're that bad. So are we evil? I mean, if we want to get down to, like, the level of, like, are we sinful? Absolutely. Are we, like, on an evil track right now? I think we definitely are. Do I think that we could get overtaken in the foreseeable future? I think that's a possibility. Do I think that we are in that same ballpark yet? I really don't.
I kind of disagree with you a little bit.
Go for it.
I still think the answer to the question is yes. Let me just read it to myself again. Yeah. So could we be considered evil? I think yes. Are we going down the same path as Israel? Yes. If so, does that put us at risk of being overpowered by other nations? Yes. But I also think that if we were, you know, how the country was 200 years ago, or, like, as far as, like, being run from a Christian standpoint, like, our country was founded on biblical values, Judeo-Christian values. I don't necessarily think that just if that was true, that would make us immune from being taken over by another country either.
Sure,
so, like, there's kind of that flip side of the question.
I don't think it's a matter, I mean, it could be. It's not a matter of, like, once we hit a certain line of evil, then we're going to get taken over because of God's judgment.
Right, because then we're presuming to know exactly what God's scales are.
I mean, could we get to a point where God's like, you know what, we're done, and do we get destroyed? Sure, I think that's definitely a possibility. But I don't, like, we don't have prophets like Israel did, coming in with the words of God saying, you guys are so evil that if you don't turn, you're going to be destroyed. Now, there's people that are saying that, but legitimate, like, people from God, that's not an actual prophecy.
I also think there's a difference in just status of nations between Israel and America. Like, Israel is and continues to be, like, God's chosen nation of people. But we are grafted in as Christians of any color, nationality, you know, all of the above. So it's It's just a different thing in kind. But what I wanted to disagree with you on is I don't necessarily know that we are any better than any of the other evil that we see going on in the world, considering the amount of unborn children that we are continuing since Roe to murder. I think our evil is more civilized from a and if you're just listening to this, I put air quotes around the word civilized because it's kind of like under the rug. Do you know what I mean? A lot of the evil that goes on is under the guise of consent or under the guise of human rights even, or social justice sometimes.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
But I think that comes because we're for the first time in human history, we're entering like a godless society. It's not that we can make
in human history or in the history of America?
In the history of man. Like
Okay.
there's never been just like we just don't believe in any sort of like deity.
Like we're post
religion.
Yeah,
essentially.
got you.
And I would argue that we're actually not, but it's not a set, not even an organized religion. Like I would firmly argue that people are very religious at very like I think
their religion is just themselves.
Yeah,
their God is
I think
themselves.
I think there's some some far out people that like essentially their religion is abortion, and like there's not your normal everyday person, but like there's people like look at some of our politicians and the way they talk, like they are worshiping these things, and it may come back to themselves. I don't know, but
I think that boons my point actually.
Right. but it's because we're at it's a godless evil rather than a like. It's evil going in a direction of maybe more the self or something, rather than saying, hey, I don't want that God, I want to worship that instead. And that's where it's been for all of human history. Is I don't care about that.
True.
I want to worship Allah. I want to worship the 600 Hindu gods. It's always I don't want that. I want this instead. And now it's still that way when you get into the philosophy of it. But at the people level, it's I just don't want that. I know my own way, rather than saying I know a better way per se. I'm really not being very clear, but I think
we could go on and on for days about this.
There's always been evil in America.
Yeah.
There's always been evil everywhere since the fall. This question at the end, so I know there's no way of telling, so it's a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
So I think the answer to the question is like all of the answer is yes, but none of that is a direct necessarily reflection of God's judgment on America. And it could just be like our time is done. We shot ourselves in the face, and you know what? Now we lost. That could be it. And that could also be God's judgment. We'd have no way of necessarily knowing because we're, like you said, we're not in the same situation that Old Testament Israel was in. But
so on that note, we'll just scoop right into the next question because I think it flows. So is America Israel or Babylon? And Andy posed this question, was it 2 weeks ago? Second service. He actually was like, I didn't plan on saying this, but this is a thought that came to my mind. So after the prayer, he came up and kind of said, think on these things. So we're going to talk about it a little bit. But is America God's disobedient people who need to be brought back to God? Or are Christians in America like God's people in exile who are called to pray and seek the welfare of our Babylon, which is the U.S., and that comes from a passage in Isaiah, Jeremiah. Jeremiah 29:7 says, "But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare."
Yeah. It's Babylon. We're not God's. We as America are not God's chosen people. That end of argument. Like we're not. We never were. We never will be. As America, we are as the church, as Christian people. So First Peter is written. It's in the first two verses. It's written to the elect exiles of the dispersion. That's when the Jews were dispersed across all of Asia Minor and everything. He's writing to these people who have been exiled from the land of Israel, and that's where we're at today. Like we are all, since we went from Old Testament Israel and now it's the worldwide church. It's all the Gentiles being grafted in. There is no like chosen nation. There is no chosen geography, land. There, like it's all of us across the world. So I've heard it said before, like, I have more in common with a Christian person living in Saudi Arabia than I do with somebody in Cleveland who's not a believer. We're spread across the entire world. We're spread across all sorts of different geographies, people groups, nations. That's what the unity is. And so there is no one chosen nation. Thus, America is Babylon. We are exiles living in America, or living in China, or living in Germany, or wherever you might live. We are elect exiles of the dispersion, essentially.
And in the end, there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and it will all be God's, all of it. It is all God's, all of it, but, that already not yet kind of thing that we talk about sometimes. We are a country that is founded on biblical values.
Yeah.
And there has been times where we are run more consistently with those values.
Yeah.
And I do think that God can and does choose to bless nations when they turn towards him collectively. But I don't think that is a necessary thing. Like, it's just like, it's like there's the principle, like principles stand true, but like America's not in the Bible, right? Like, if there's no like prophecy about like, there's no biblical prophecy saying, this country is going to be this in the end or whatever it is, as far as like the United States of America goes. So I would agree with you. We're Babylon. But I don't think that means that we just like give up on our nation either. Right. Like, because that's exactly what Jeremiah says, Jeremiah 29. Earlier from what I read, in verse 5, he says, build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce, take wives and have sons and daughters, take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage that they may bear sons and daughters, multiply there and do not decrease. And then he talks about seek the welfare of your city. And that gives me a lot of hope as a parent, because I think there is an entire movement of not just Christians, but lots of people who look at the world and go, I don't want to bring kids into this mess. And this is, for us today, I think this scripture is like, wherever you are planted, that is where God will meet you. And he will bring you into, like, my children, it gives me hope that, like, my children were born for this time. They were born, and I pray every night that they follow the Lord and that they would become the people that he wants them to be, and that they would be courageous in their time and serve the Lord. And we just talked about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Like, I pray that would be, their hearts would be strengthened like that, So.
Yeah. Well, in Romans 13, 1 Peter 2, be subject to the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be the emperor, governors, so on and so forth. Like, we're meant to submit to our governing authorities, whether they're good or bad or otherwise, as long as they're not, forcing us in contradiction with what this book says. So that being said, I should want even those I disagree with to prosper, because that means that me and my loved ones and everyone else prospers when the highest person prospers. Like, I mean, I'm not a big fan of Joe Biden, but right now, he's not succeeding right now in inflation and in interest rates and everything. And because of that, if I get a loan, which we want to get a house at some point, like, I have to pay a lot higher mortgage rate. So should I pray that, like, Joe Biden can succeed and so that I don't have to pay as high of a mortgage rate? Sure, I think that's great. It doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree with who's in charge. Like, their prosperity directly applies to your prosperity, my prosperity, and the rest of this nation. And because we're in America, a lot of the world. And so, like, should we sit here and be like, well, I hope that this guy fails so that my guy can win in November?
Right.
No, that's a stupid thing to want. Like, you don't want to fail upwards, essentially.
We want him to meet the Lord in a way that he is changed, Well,
but I think even beyond that, like, whether or not, Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Obama or whoever is at the top of the American pyramid at that time, whether or not that they're a believer, yes, that should be the first and foremost thing. Yeah. But like they're whether they succeed or not doesn't necessarily, like, that's a different point than just their salvation status. Well,
my thing was like, like King Nebuchadnezzar, like he
Yeah.
saw the glory of the
Yeah.
Lord in everything, and he said, okay, well, now I'm going hardcore the other way. We'll cut off your limbs, rip you limb from limb if you do not worship the God Most High, or if you say anything bad about the God
I think
Most
we
High.
should try that evangelistic strategy.
That
I
would
think-
be awesome.
yes.
No. Just kidding.
I mean, if we make a spectacle of it on a Sunday morning, I think we can convince people, you know?
Now we're going to get censored. Okay, well, I think we sufficiently beat down that question.
I think so too.
We ripped it limb from limb.
Oh my God. That was bad.
I know. Sorry, guys. Sorry.
Well, thanks for watching another week, and we hope to catch you around next time.